My name is k.a.carson, and my midterm presentation is on the topic of cognitive dissonance theory. So, first, understanding cognitive dissonance theory, you have to know what cognitive dissonance is. And basically, it's a mental state that occurs when a person experiences inconsistency. This inconsistency occurs between two different beliefs, or a belief and an action. Basically, whenever a person has this contradiction between either two beliefs or a belief and an action, it causes an uncomfortable feeling within them. And this uncomfortable feeling is why humans try to avoid dissonance, because whenever we encounter a situation where we contradict ourselves, it causes us to enter distress and we are very uncomfortable with it. Essentially, when it comes to the distress is going to be a lot more stronger and a lot more uncomfortable the greater the inconsistency is. Whereas if it's just a minor inconsistency, we're not going to be as uncomfortable with that. The theory also goes into detail with how cognitive dissonance is dealt with by people who experience it and how people react to it. So some people deal with it by avoiding information that would cause you to question your beliefs, because if you encounter information that's inconsistent with what you believe, it could cause dissonance. Some people, after committing an action that's very, like on the fence and they're not really sure if it was the right action to take, it creates a need for reassurance whenever that happens, so that they know that they made the right decision and there's no dissonance between the action that they took and the action that should have been taken. And sometimes whenever a person encounters cognitive dissonance, they change the belief or change the actions that they're taking so that the dissonance stops occurring. Because if the belief or the action are contradicting something, removing the belief or the action would remove the dissonance as well. So all of this stuff comes from a key scholar named Leon Festinger, who published the theory in 1957. Now, 1957 was around the time when smoking was beginning to be studied by scientists, and people were starting to realize that smoking actually wasn't that healthy, and it was causing things like lung cancer, heart disease, and other negative medical problems. And so Leon Festinger used smoking to illustrate how cognitive dissonance occurs. The two inconsistencies were people believed smoking cigarettes is dangerous, but the action that they took was smoking cigarettes. So there were three ways that most smokers dealt with this dissonance in the 1950s and 60s. They would trivialize or deny the negative effects, saying like, oh, there aren't a lot of studies that suggest that smoking is harmful, or saying like, I don't smoke that often, so it's not going to be that harmful to me personally. Other smokers would say that the positive effects outweigh the negative effects, saying that, well, I need smoking to calm me down, and if I don't smoke, I'm going to become, a murderous maniac or whatever. And so saying that those positive effects are more important than the negative effects deals with the dissonance between the belief and the action. And then other smokers just accepted the fact that they aren't able to control their actions. So they just say they're addicted to smoking, they can't do anything about it. And that removes the dissonance by removing the need to change the action. And what Leon Festinger found is that when people and smokers were faced with cognitive dissonance, what happened was it led them to either change their attitudes or their beliefs, because the confrontation with that inconsistency causes them to question and then change their belief or attitude. So cognitive dissonance theory is housed in the socio-psychological tradition, and scholars in this tradition basically believe that they can learn things about communication through observation. And through observation, they can find cause and effect relationships. And what's key about this is that this tradition doesn't really focus on analyzing communication as it happens. It uses communication theories as a method of predicting future behaviors, either predicting future results or figuring how to change future results, how to get others to change. So that's kind of the key question of socio-psychological tradition. How do you predict future behaviors, and how do you change future behaviors in other people? And cognitive dissonance is very clearly a part of the socio-psychological tradition. Festinger built his theory on observation. He observed smokers in the 50s and 60s. So it's built in observation. And the focus of the theory is studying how cognitive dissonance changes other people's attitudes and beliefs and how it affects future behaviors. So cognitive dissonance theory has a lot of positive contributions to communication theory. First, cognitive dissonance is something that a lot of people see and experience pretty often, or at least when it comes to small levels of distress with cognitive dissonance. Most people would probably say they could experience that weekly or daily. And everyone has probably on occasion experienced a very strong level of inconsistency with a lot of high distress due to that cognitive dissonance. So it's something that people experience pretty widely in their daily lives or their whole lives. The cognitive dissonance theory also provides some very clear explanations for how changing attitudes and beliefs occurs, which is something that we can observe and practice and also use when it comes to dealing with other people and perhaps trying to change other people's attitudes and beliefs, or just studying how other people change those attitudes and beliefs. And lastly, the topics from the theory can be practically applied to interpersonal and professional communication. Like I just said, if you have a relationship that you need to understand the other person better, or maybe affect the way they deal with their attitudes and beliefs, cognitive dissonance theory is a very helpful tool that you can use for either analyzing the situation or affecting the situation. So when it comes to human communication, cognitive dissonance theory has some pretty significant implications when it comes to relationships and how relationships are formed and maintained. So when it comes to a successful interpersonal relationships, two positive traits that help towards a successful relationship are trust and the ability to predict future behaviors. So cognitive dissonance, whenever it occurs in a person, causes problems for these two traits. When someone experiences a cognitive dissonance, an inconsistency between what they believe and what they do, it causes distrust from the other person because the other person says, okay, well, they told me they believe this, but then they commit an action that says something else. So why should I trust what they say they believe if it doesn't seem to be true based on their actions? So cognitive dissonance has a negative effect on building trust in relationships. And then beyond that, this is kind of similar, but whenever a person takes an action that contradicts with their beliefs, if the other person made predictions of the other person's behaviors based on the beliefs that the other person held, then committing an action that doesn't align with those beliefs will basically stop the other person from being able to predict your behavior. So whenever a cognitive dissonance occurs, it reduces the other person's ability to predict future behaviors, which is not good for relationships. So there are some potential extensions. These 3 extensions I got from a study that is from Vadis and Bran in my references page if you want to look at it. But these are 3 ways that cognitive dissonance theory could be improved. First, the theory could be more specific regarding the term cognitive dissonance, with further criteria on what constitutes a belief or action when it comes to that belief or action being part of a cognitive dissonance. And this basically contributes to more standardization so that experimentation or analysis of cognitive dissonance could be better synergized between differing scholars, just because the lack of specificity kind of hinders that shared experimentation or that shared knowledge. The theory should also pay more focus on the consequences of being in distress due to cognitive dissonance. Most of cognitive dissonance theory focuses on how people react to cognitive dissonance, but it doesn't really talk about the negative emotions and the uncomfortableness that people experience when under cognitive dissonance. So the theory could also expand in that area. And lastly, the theory should provide more standardized methodology for identifying and analyzing cognitive dissonance and how it begins. And it kind of goes into the first one, but if cognitive dissonance as an academic theory were to be improved for people studying cognitive dissonance, it would be much more helpful if the methods for identifying cognitive dissonance and analyzing cognitive dissonance were standardized so that everyone's kind of working with the same information when it comes to studying cognitive dissonance and how it occurs.